In 1976, a satellite disappeared from the sky, and for 30 years, no one was allowed to ask why. The Soviet Union marked it as a routine failure in their public logs, a single line of administrative text that hid something far more valuable. What happens when an entire nation's geography becomes a classified secret? During the height of the Cold War, the Soviet Union operated dozens of reconnaissance satellites under the Zenit program, launching them from sites across the USSR to photograph NATO installations, troop movements, oil and Western infrastructure. One satellite, designated Kosmos 922, launched in May 1976 with a mission timeline of 2 weeks, carrying high-resolution film cameras designed to capture images from low Earth orbit before ejecting a re-entry capsule back to Soviet territory. But Kosmos 922 never came home. The satellite's loss wouldn't have mattered to history except for one detail. The images it carried weren't just of Western targets. They were the most detailed maps of Soviet Central Asia ever created, showing restricted military zones, closed cities, and infrastructure the Kremlin had spent decades keeping off every public map. For a nation built on controlling information, losing that film capsule to uncertainty meant losing control of their own secrets. The Zenit 4MK satellite lifted off from Baikonur Cosmodrome on May 25, 1976, riding a Soyuz rocket into a sun-synchronous orbit 250 kilometers above Earth. Its camera systems activated over Scandinavia, beginning a systematic sweep southward across Europe, the Middle East, and back over Soviet territory, capturing frame after frame on specialized film designed to survive the vacuum of space. The mission proceeded normally for 11 days. On June 5, 1976, ground controllers in Yevpatoria sent the deorbit command. The satellite was supposed to separate its film capsule, fire retro rockets, and send its payload on a ballistic arc toward a recovery zone in Kazakhstan, where helicopters and ground teams waited with radio beacons and tracking equipment. The signal was sent, the satellite acknowledged, then silence. Recovery teams waited at the designated coordinates for 18 hours. No parachute appeared in the sky. No emergency beacon activated. Radio telescopes across the Soviet tracking network swept their assigned frequencies and found nothing. Kosmos 922's film capsule, containing hundreds of high-resolution photographs, had vanished somewhere between orbit and ground. What happened next was administrative silence. The official record published by TASS, the Soviet news agency, listed Kosmos 922 as mission concluded, with no mention of recovery failure. Internal memos, later declassified, show a different picture. Emergency meetings at the GRU Military Intelligence Directorate, urgent consultations with the KGB's Scientific Technical Division, and a restricted working group codenamed Project Veil, tasked with determining where the capsule might have landed. The math was brutal. Depending on exactly when the retro rockets failed or the separation mechanism malfunctioned, the capsule could have come down anywhere along a ground track stretching from Eastern Europe through Turkey, Iran, Afghanistan, and into Pakistan or Western China. Each kilometer of uncertainty meant another square mile of terrain where the capsule might be sitting intact, waiting for someone to find it. And the film inside could be developed by anyone with a darkroom and chemistry knowledge. For the next 6 weeks, Project Veil operated in absolute secrecy. Diplomatic cables were sent to Soviet embassies along the corridor, instructing cultural attachés and intelligence officers to monitor local news, watch for reports of unusual metal debris, and cultivate sources who might hear rumors from border regions. Meanwhile, cartographers at the main Directorate of Geodesy and Cartography began an audit of exactly what was on that film. The inventory was damning. Frames showing the Semipalatinsk nuclear test site with blast craters visible from orbit. Images of closed cities like Chelyabinsk 40 and Krasnoyarsk 26, where plutonium production reactors operated behind fences that didn't exist on any map. Detailed reconnaissance of Soviet missile silos, air defense radar installations, and the restricted zones surrounding the Baikonur Cosmodrome itself. By August 1976, the official position hardened into doctrine. At a closed session of the Defense Council, a decision was made. The satellite had never carried sensitive domestic imagery, the mission had concluded successfully, and no further discussion was warranted. The file was sealed. Project Veil was dissolved. Officers who had worked the case were reassigned to distant posts. The silence became policy, but the silence created its own problems. Western intelligence agencies noticed the gap. CIA analysts comparing Soviet launch manifests against known recovery operations flagged Kosmos 922 as a probable failure. British signals intelligence recorded unusual Soviet radio traffic over Central Asia in early June. The Americans even deployed a SR-71 Blackbird flight along the southern Soviet border, photographing terrain features to compare against pre-existing maps, looking for evidence of impact or recovery operations. What they found, or didn't find, remained classified for decades. But the absence of the capsule became its own kind of presence, a negative space in the intelligence record that implied vulnerability. The case for the lost satellite rests on three categories of evidence, each with different levels of verification. The first category is Soviet space program records, released gradually after 1991, when the USSR collapsed and state archives began limited declassification. These documents confirm the launch, the mission parameters, and the lack of confirmed recovery, though they offer no details about subsequent search efforts. The second category is intelligence, intercepts in diplomatic traffic. Western signals intelligence agencies recorded Soviet radio communications showing unusual military activity along the Afghan and Iranian borders in June 1976, including helicopter movements and coded requests for object recovery that matched patterns from previous satellite retrieval operations. British and American satellite imagery from the period shows Soviet military vehicles in areas they didn't normally patrol. The third category is testimonial, coming from individuals who worked in related fields. A former GRU officer, writing under the pseudonym Colonel Shenkov in a 2004 Russian military history journal, described being assigned to a special search group tasked with investigating foreign terrain for lost equipment in summer 1976, though he never confirmed finding anything. A Kazakh geologist reported in a 2010 interview that his survey team was questioned by military intelligence officers in 1976 about unusual metal debris, though he had seen none. No physical evidence of the capsule itself has ever been publicly confirmed. No photographs of it, no recovered film, no debris analysis. The strongest evidence is the absence in official records paired with the presence of unusual activity that matches search and recovery patterns. Alternative explanations exist, and the evidence doesn't definitively rule them out. One possibility is that the capsule burned up on re-entry due to a heat shield failure, scattering fragments too small and too dispersed to recover. This would explain the lack of recovery without requiring the capsule to have survived intact. Another view held by some Russian space historians is that the capsule was recovered successfully, but the operation was so sensitive that even internal records were destroyed, with the public failure story serving as cover for a covert retrieval. This interpretation points to gaps in archive materials and missing pages in logbooks as evidence of deliberate redaction. A third explanation focuses on the possibility of foreign recovery. If the capsule came down in Iran, Afghanistan, or Pakistan, it might have been found by local authorities or intelligence services who chose not to advertise the find. The film could have been developed, copied, and the hardware quietly disposed of with no public acknowledgement to avoid diplomatic complications. Each explanation has problems. Re-entry burnup should have left a debris field detectable by Western space tracking radars, but none reported unusual activity. Covert Soviet recovery seems unlikely given the scale of search operations and the number of personnel involved, any of whom might have spoken in later decades. Foreign recovery is plausible but would require exceptional secrecy from multiple governments over 50 years. The human dimension of this story isn't about casualties or direct harm, but about the people who lived inside the geography that was being kept secret. The closed city, photographed by Kosmos 922, were home to hundreds of thousands of Soviet citizens who officially didn't exist in state records. Their addresses were post office boxes in distant regional centers. Their movements were restricted. Their existence was classified. For these workers and their families, the possibility that foreign intelligence might obtain detailed maps of their locations meant potential targeting in any future conflict. The Cold War operated on the logic of mutually assured destruction, where knowing the location of your enemy's weapons meant knowing what to destroy first. Every reactor, every warhead assembly facility, every command bunker in those photographs represented someone's workplace, someone's neighborhood, someone's life lived in the crosshairs. The Kazakh and Central Asian communities living near test sites and restricted zones carried their own burdens. Generations were exposed to radiation from nuclear tests, suffered elevated cancer rates, and watched their farmland declared off limits without explanation. The secrecy that kept their suffering quiet was the same secrecy that Kosmos 922 threatened to expose, not to help them, but to make them targets. To understand why one lost satellite mattered so much, imagine your home appearing on a map that your worst enemy is drawing. Not just your street, but the thickness of your walls, the location of your safe, the route you take to work. That's what reconnaissance satellites did at scale, turning national security into a problem of information control. The Cold War was fundamentally an information war. Both superpowers spent billions trying to see each other's secrets while keeping their own hidden. A satellite camera was just a tool, but the film it carried was the most concentrated form of strategic intelligence available. Data that couldn't be encrypted, couldn't be recalled, and couldn't be erased once captured. When that film went missing, it created a paradox. Soviet planners had to assume the worst, that the capsule survived, was found, and was being analyzed. But they couldn't confirm it. They had to act as if their most sensitive locations were compromised while maintaining public denial that anything was wrong. It's like playing chess while assuming your opponent can see through the board, but you can't ask them what they see. This matters beyond Cold War history because the problem hasn't gone away. It's just changed form. Modern satellite imagery is digital, transmitted instantly, and available to anyone with internet access and a credit card. The idea that a nation can keep its geography secret is obsolete. But the tension between transparency and security, between what the public can know and what states want to hide, remains exactly the same. Here's what we know for certain. A Soviet spy satellite failed to return its film in 1976, triggering secret search operations and administrative silence. We know the film contained sensitive imagery of Soviet territory. We know it was never publicly recovered. What we don't know is whether it burned up, was hidden, or was found by someone who chose to stay quiet. The story matters because it shows how fragile information control can be, even for superpowers with unlimited resources. And it leaves us with a question that connects directly to today's world. For the historical record, 3 scenarios remain open. First, a researcher or archivist might discover previously unknown documents in Russian state archives as more Cold War files undergo routine declassification. Confidence level, medium. Archives continue to release materials on 50-year cycles, and space program records have been subject to ongoing review. Second, someone with direct knowledge, a former intelligence officer, a recovery team member, or a foreign agent, might come forward as witnesses from that era, reach the end of their lives, and feel less bound by security oaths. Confidence level, low. The number of living witnesses shrinks each year, and those who remain have kept silent for nearly 5 decades. Third, the capsule itself might be discovered by accident, perhaps by a mining operation, infrastructure project, or archaeological survey in Central Asia or the Middle East. Confidence level very low. The region is vast, the capsule would be corroded and possibly buried, and without specific coordinates, the search area is effectively infinite. The more likely outcome is that the case remains unresolved, joining thousands of other Cold War mysteries that were documented just well enough to prove something happened, but not well enough to prove what. The satellite that kept a country's secret is still out there, somewhere in a field or a file cabinet, or the bottom of a ravine where no one will ever look. Its silence has lasted longer than the Soviet Union that launched it. And that silence reminds us that some questions outlive the people who could have answered them. If this story caught your attention, The next logical watch is our documentary on the CIA's secret satellites that landed in the wrong country, which explores what happens when reconnaissance hardware falls into unintended hands in the diplomatic chaos that follows.